Karen slipped the fee notice into our mailbox on Easter morning, no vote, no warning, just a 40% hike wrapped in grayscale ink. Names Lowell Internal Controller, semi-retired, been living here since the HOA still mailed minutes by fax. Didn't say a word then, just laid the letter beside my old folder marked 2007 Charter, original copy. Ever had someone break the rules in broad daylight thinking no one kept the receipt? The envelope was bent in 3 places like someone had jammed it in there after a second thought. It wasn't addressed to me by name, just resident. Still, I knew it was HOA business. They always used that low-gloss envelope stock that absorbed thumbprints too easily, and the print was grayscale like it had been run off at someone's office printer between insurance statements. I stood at the end of our gravel driveway with the mail in one hand sorting bills from junk when the number caught my eye. $420 on dollars. Quarterly dues, effective next month. I blinked. That was a 40% increase. No meeting, no notice, just a letter folded in half like it hoped not to be read. Inside, the wording was intentionally soft, to maintain and improve the integrity of our shared spaces. A phrase that could mean park benches or the president's ego. At the bottom, Myrna Quayle, HOA president, signed in her usual all-caps serif font. No signature, just a name printed like a commandment. I looked up at the mailbox cluster, a row of 6 rust-colored boxes half sunken into the dirt backed by a creosote bush fighting to stay green. The desert wind had started to pick up. It always did in March. The kind that feels like it knows something before you do. Darla was stirring lentils when I walked in. She didn't look up when I set the letter on the counter. They raised it again, I said. Water or dues? She asked. Dues. She sighed through her nose, kept stirring. By how much? 40%. That got her to stop. Spoon mid-air. She turned to face me, eyes narrowed. And they didn't hold a vote? Nope. She shook her head and returned to the pot. Lowell, I love you, but don't spiral. We just replaced the septic pump. I'm not doing another ulcer year. I smiled a little. She wasn't wrong. In 2019, I'd spent 6 months fighting with the county about stormwater drainage classifications. I'd ended up with a 43-page PDF and a twitch in my right eyelid. Darla called it the Great Culvert Incident. But this felt different. Less about the money, more about the quiet shift of rules. Like the ground moved a little when you weren't looking. After dinner, I pulled up the HOA website such as it was. 3 outdated links and a calendar with one item: spring planting day. I clicked bylaws. A PDF opened. Version 3.3 dated July 2018. It had the usual language quorum requirements, late FE penalties, but the section on dues adjustments was vague. Reasonable adjustments may be enacted by the executive board in response to cost fluctuations. That was the phrase. Reasonable. A word that begs for interpretation. I scrolled down, hoping for definitions, footnotes, maybe an appendix. Nothing. No mention of percentage caps, vote thresholds, or what exactly qualified as executive board. Myrna, for all her certainty, wasn't the clearest writer. At 11 p.m., I gave up. Darla was already asleep, her book face down on the comforter. I slipped in beside her, but I didn't fall asleep right away. My mind kept circling back to that line, reasonable adjustments. I kept hearing it in Myrna's voice the way she over-enunciated during community meetings. I had a vague memory of her pausing after that phrase, once letting it land like a gavel. The next morning was warmer than expected. Sunlight hit the stucco in just the right way to make everything feel sharper than it was. I stepped out to get the paper. Yes, we still subscribed. Darla liked the comics and saw Gerald Pine walking his old Labrador Henry. Gerald was one of those men who always looked like he'd just come back from somewhere remote, creased jeans, sun hat with a pencil tucked in the band, and a gait like he owned time. We'd nodded at each other for years, but rarely spoke more than pleasantries. He slowed as he reached our mailbox. Morning, I said. Sure is, he said, patting Henry. Wendell pick up later. I held up the HOA letter. You get one of these? He didn't look at it. Yep. Seems steep, I said. Gerald shrugged. Back when we wrote the charter, changes like that required more than a memo. I blinked. You wrote the charter, well helped. 97, I think. Bylaws, too. Before Myrna moved in, that caught my attention. I lowered the paper. Didn't know you were part of the founding board. He smiled, thin knowing. There was a lot folks didn't ask back then. They just did. I gestured with the letter. This doesn't seem like the just doing kind, more like skipping steps. Gerald glanced around, then reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a mint. He didn't offer one, just unwrapped it with deliberate slowness. "Still got that charter in a drawer," he said, "if you're the reading type." Then he turned, gave Henry a soft whistle, and walked on. I stood there a few seconds longer, paper in one hand, letter in the other, wondering what exactly counted as reasonable when no one remembered the rules, and why Gerald kept that drawer closed all these years until now. I hadn't planned to spend a Friday night reading HOA bylaws, but that letter kept whispering from the kitchen counter like a voice I couldn't quite place. Every time I walked past it, the envelope seemed a little more crooked, a little more smug. That dull, recycled paper gray practically dared me to let it go. Darla was already in bed, her CPAP machine humming steady down the hall. I sat at my desk in the home office, the glow of my laptop turning the room the color of an old aquarium. Outside, the wind rattled the wind chimes against the pergola beams. I used to find that sound calming. I opened my cloud storage, the one I'd set up for HOA documents back when I volunteered for the finance subcommittee. They'd never removed my access. Myrna once called that inertia in action, which I think she meant as a joke, though it landed more like a shrug. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. HOA, Charter 2010.pdf, Charter amended final 2018.pdf, Bylaws on updated 3.3.pdf. I opened both versions of the charter side by side. The 2010 file was clunky scanned pages, slightly off-kilter text, a few coffee stains in the corners. But it had signatures. Real ones. Blue ink. Gerald Pines was there second from the bottom. The 2018 version was cleaner. Typeset. Margins justified. Fonts too consistent. Like someone had tried to tidy away the human fingerprints. I began reading line by line, copying key sections into a notepad file for comparison. Somewhere between fiduciary oversight and emergency expenditures, I saw it. In the 2010 charter, any adjustment exceeding 10% of annual dues must be approved by a majority of voting members present at a general meeting. In the 2018 version, any adjustment exceeding 10% of annual dues requires notice to all members prior to implementation. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing the bridge of my nose. The difference was a single clause, maybe 8 words, but it shifted the power like a fault line shifts ground. One version required a vote, the other just a notification, and yet no meeting had been held, no notice posted to the HOA board by the community garden, just that folded letter. I searched for meeting minutes, nothing from 2018, no records of a vote, no email trail. I opened the PDF's metadata, a habit left over from work checking for modification logs. The edit history was sparse. It had been exported to PDF on July 12, 2018 at 9:37 p.m. Author M. Quayle. Email myrnake@placitashoa.net. That wasn't the HOA shared account. That was her personal email. The cursor hovered over the name for a moment. I felt the quiet press of something heavier than suspicion. It wasn't illegal, maybe, but it wasn't clean. "You're muttering," came Darla's voice behind me. I jumped. She stood in the doorway in one of my old flannel shirts, hair flattened on one side, holding a glass of water. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah. Just look at this," I said, motioning toward the screen. "These two versions of the charter, this line's different." She squinted. "You're reading bylaws at midnight?" I offered a sheepish shrug. "Can't sleep." She patted barefoot across the rug, leaned over my shoulder. I pointed to the two lines. They changed the requirement from a majority vote to just notice, and I can't find any record of when or how. She exhaled slowly. "Lowell." I waited. "You know I love that you care, but if you go digging, you'd better be ready for dirt." I nodded. "I know." She didn't say more, just squeezed my shoulder, set her water glass on the desk, and headed back down the hall. The CPAP machine restarted a few minutes later, softer this time. I stared at the screen. Words by themselves are harmless, but, rearranged, tilted, just enough, they become invisible fences. You walk through the same gate for years, then one day find it locked. No sign, just a new rule slipped in with yesterday's junk mail. I saved the files, labeled the comparison Doc Charter Delta Notes. Before I could close the lid, I heard a knock at the back screen door. It was a gentle sound, not urgent. I walked through the kitchen, past the glowing numbers of the microwave, and pulled the curtain aside. Gerald stood there holding a large envelope. "Thought you might want to look at something older than that laptop," he said. Gerald sat at Pine Mesa Diner like part of the structure, same booth third from the window back against the faux brick wall. The kind of man who didn't ask for his order because the staff already had it in motion the minute he walked in. 2 eggs over medium sourdough toast, black coffee, and a green ceramic mug that matched the formica. He looked up when I stepped through the door, but only just. A slight nod. I took the seat across from him without a word. "Didn't peg you as a morning type," he said, not looking up from his toast. "I'm not," I replied. "But I haven't slept right since Tuesday," he grunted. Letter. The waitress, a woman named Rowe with inked forearms and the driest wit in the county, came by and poured coffee into a chipped white mug for me. No menu, no pleasantries, just coffee. We sat in silence for a while. The diner hummed with a low-rhythm dishware clink, occasional sizzle from the kitchen murmurs of early risers. Above Gerald's booth was a faded photograph framed in glass, a community meeting from 2008. Gerald was in the back row, arms crossed. Myrna was front and center, smiling too wide, holding a microphone like she was born with it. Gerald followed my gaze. "That was the irrigation debacle," he said. "She showed up for the picture, left before the vote." I raised an eyebrow. "You remember that I remember everything I've had to fix twice." He pulled a manila folder from the bench beside him and set it on the table. The edges were curled like they'd been pressed between phone books for years. A faint ring from a coffee mug stained one corner. "She asked for this copy," he said, tapping the folder. "Back in 19. Told her I lost it." "And did you?" I asked. He smirked. "Only in spirit." I opened the folder. Inside, the original 2007 charter typed annotated in blue ink and bearing the fingerprints of people who'd actually argued over the words, not just formatted them. Back then, Gerald said we didn't have lawyers. Just a few of us with sense and a legal pad. We wanted it clear any change over 10% required a vote. In person. Quorum. Counted by hand. He sipped his coffee. "We figured if someone couldn't explain a budget increase to 30 people and get 15 of them to nod, maybe they shouldn't be raising anything." I flipped to the voting section. There it was. "Dues increases beyond 10% shall require a recorded majority vote of present members at a scheduled meeting publicly posted at least 14 days prior." Simple, unambiguous, and completely scrubbed in the 2018 version. Why didn't this version carry forward? I asked. Gerald chuckled. Myrna said it was too rigid for a growing community. Started using words like fluidity and executive discretion. Next thing you know, documents get streamlined. And no one objected. He shook his head. Oh, people grumbled. But they also wanted the summer BBQ back and more security cameras at the dog park. She gave him that. Silence settled in again. The waitress refilled both our mugs without asking. My eggs arrived unannounced, and I stared at them like they held answers. Gerald leaned in. "Look, Lowell, you want to read that thing, read it. But if you go public, it gets loud fast." "You mean pushback?" "I mean neighbors picking sides. Board members throwing around words like defamation. Emails you never sent mysteriously appearing." I didn't answer, just nodded slowly. He slid the folder toward me. This never left my house, not even when she asked. I hesitated, then took it. Outside, the morning had warmed. Sunlight spread across the sidewalk in long rectangles. The Sandia Mountains loomed in the distance, soft-edged in the haze. I walked home with the folder tucked under one arm like a borrowed Bible. The pages inside rustled faintly with every step like they were whispering, "Finally." At home, I laid the folder on the dining table and opened it again. On the last page were 3 signatures. Gerald Pine, Edna Navarro, Lawrence Culpepper, and then a blank line. No fourth name, no Myrna. The folder still lay on my desk from the night before, unopened since the walk home from Pine Mesa Diner. I hadn't touched it all morning, but its presence filled the room like a grandfather clock, silent but full of history. When I finally pulled the flap open, the first thing I noticed wasn't the words, but the scent. Faint linen and old ink. It made me sit up straighter like I was handling something sacred. The charter wasn't bound, just a stack of crisp pages held together by a rusted paperclip. The top page had a smudge in the corner and a single crease as though someone had folded it long ago to carry in a jacket pocket. The ink had faded just enough to soften the font, but the words still stood firm. Darla walked past the doorway on her way to the kitchen and paused, eyeing the open folder. "You really think any of this will matter to folks who just want the pool open?" she asked. I didn't look up. It might not matter to them now, but it should have mattered to the board. She lingered another second, then disappeared down the hallway. I turned to section 6.3, the section Gerald had mentioned but hadn't quoted verbatim. The paragraph was short. Any change to annual or quarterly fees exceeding 15% shall be subject to a 2/3 vote of active community members cast in person at a scheduled and publicly posted meeting. No interpretation. No hedging language. It was law, at least as much as any neighborhood could claim law. I flipped forward to the appendix and margin notes, blue ballpoint ink written by someone with square handwriting. I assumed Gerald. One note read, "Key limit. Prevents abuse during budget panic." Another meeting, ill body, not notice. Simple firm. Someone had taken time to say what they meant. I stood and opened the curtains. Daylight spilled across the room in slats. The desk, usually a home for unpaid bills and outdated takeout menus, had become something else. A workspace. A war room, maybe? I gathered a yellow legal pad, a highlighter, my work laptop. Logged in. Checked the HOA website again. Still no record of any meeting minutes from 2018. The community archive section was a ghost town, 5 years of blank months and empty PDF placeholders. The most recent document posted was a pool maintenance schedule from last summer. I pulled out a printed copy of the amended 2018 version, placed it beside the original Gerald had given me. The contrast was almost theatrical. Where the old charter bore the warmth of human disagreement, the new one was sterile, impersonal. Designed for authority, not clarity. The language had changed in more than just Section 6.3. In the original, a quorum shall be formed when no fewer than 20 voting households are physically present. In the update, a quorum shall be understood as a reasonable representation of active members. That word again, reasonable. Myrna's favorite cloak. I highlighted it. I began compiling a list. Timeline of charter revisions, 2007 to 2018. Language shifts in voting sections. Unpublished meeting records. Gaps, 2018 Q2. Metadata. Trace M. Quail email usage. Each line steadied me, not because it gave me power, but because it made me feel less like I was losing my grip. I wasn't imagining things. I was documenting them. Around noon, Darla appeared again, this time holding a mug of coffee in both hands. She didn't say anything. Just set it beside my laptop and brushed a few crumbs off the edge of the desk. "Thanks," I said. She didn't leave right away, just stood beside me watching the pages. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. "Just don't burn us down with this." I reached for her hand and gave it a light squeeze. "I'm not trying to start a fire. I'm trying to stop one." She nodded and left the room. I returned to the charter. Something in the alignment felt off. I resized the 2018 PDF and the original to match margins. Side by side, paragraph by paragraph. My finger traced the exact place where Section 6.3 had been sliced and repurposed. The 2018 document had added a bullet point under administrative adjustments not found in any prior version. Fee adjustments made in response to emergent costs may be authorized by the acting board without general vote. It wasn't even properly labeled. Just slipped in like a footnote. I checked the timestamp again. Last modified July 12, 2018. 9:37 p.m. Author M. Quail. That night again. It was the same line Myrna had built her argument on during last year's budget meeting when someone had questioned the landscaping fee bump. I remembered her saying the board reserves discretion during off-cycle adjustments. She hadn't mentioned that line didn't exist in any ratified version of the charter. I added another bullet to the timeline. Unauthorized clause inserted post-ratification. Flagged. My phone buzzed on the desk. Gerald. Text. "When you're ready, I'll vouch for what's real." I stared at the message. Just 7 words, but they landed with the gravity of a signature. I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't chasing villains in the night or plotting civil war in the cul-de-sac. All I wanted was an answer. What happened to the funds? We set aside for the community park. It started in Emery Culver's home office, a converted garage that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and warm toner. His desk looked like the cockpit of a commercial jet. Dual monitors, 3 printers, 3 calculators, and 1 yellow canary perched in a cage by the window that squawked every time the paper tray moved. "I thought you retired," I said, stepping around a pile of banker boxes labeled Q 2014 and Annual Budget Archives 2012. "I did," Emery replied. "From the part people paid me for. Obsessing over math that stays." I dropped the folder onto his desk. "Charter's one thing, but now I want to follow the money." He raised an eyebrow, adjusted his glasses, and opened a fresh ledger sheet on his screen. You bring receipts? I nodded. Pulled quarterly statements from the HOA website and what I could find in cloud storage. Some were PDFs scanned sideways. One was password locked. Guess what the password was? He didn't respond, but I saw the corners of his mouth twitch. We sat for the next 2 hours in a kind of reverent silence only CPAs could create. Emery moved through the documents like a surgeon, highlighting totals, checking formatting quirks, scribbling codes on a legal pad. I provided context when needed: committee minutes, board announcements, budget changes year over year. Then we hit a snag. Emery squinted at his monitor and muttered, "Line item, community security enhancements, $18,500. Disbursed April 2021. I leaned in. That's about when the park development was paused, citing budget constraints. He tapped the screen. Payee listed as Southwest Security Advisors, LLC. Never heard of them. That's odd, he said, because I can't find them either. He ran a quick check: New Mexico State Registry, IRS business lookup, even LinkedIn. No hits. That's a ghost company, Emery said. No EIN, no incorporation papers, no online footprint. That's not sloppy. That's intentional. I felt my jaw clench. Any notes attached? He clicked further. Memo line says, Advance for Perimeter Consulting, Phase 1. I leaned back in the chair. Consulting. For a park fence that never got built, Emery printed the disbursement sheet. The ink was still warm when he handed it to me. At the bottom, digitally signed, approved M. Quail date April 3rd, 2021, 9:14 p.m. No other board members signed off, I asked. Nope. Single authorization. Emery shook his head. That's not a process error. That's circumvention. The printer whirred again as he handed me a second sheet: cumulative expenditures for Q1, Q3 of 2021. The numbers didn't balance, not even close. This, he said, pointing at the net deficit margin, is why we didn't have money for landscaping last fall. She redirected the shortfall. There was a knock on the frame of the open garage door. Sophia Alvarez stood there holding a takeout coffee tray and a folder under her arm. She gave us both a nod and walked in like she belonged, which in a way she did. As the HOA's de facto communications lead, Sophia had sat through more meetings than most board members. She remembered things others forgot, and she rarely offered information unless it mattered. I heard you're building a case, she said, setting a cup down next to me. I replied, we just found 18 grand meant for park fencing that went to a ghost vendor. She arched an eyebrow. That explains the silent budget vote last April, Emery added. Except there was no vote. That's the problem. Sophia opened her folder and pulled out a meeting agenda printed on lavender cardstock. Back in March, she said Myrna handed these out. Spring Town Hall, you remember? She told everyone the park would be done by July. She reached into her phone and tapped a few icons. I have the footage. You can hear her say it. The funds are earmarked. We're already moving forward with construction quotes. That was her wording. I looked at Emery, then back at Sophia. Want me to pull it? She asked, already knowing the answer. I nodded slowly. Yes. And send me a copy. She offered a dry smile. Already did. I looked back at the disbursement sheet. The highlighter streak Emery had used cut straight through the line total like a scalpel. This wasn't just questionable governance anymore. This was deliberate redirection, and if Sophia's clip confirmed what she said, we now had two pillars of something no board likes. Promises and proof. When I handed Gerald the printout, the disbursement sheet, Myrna's lone signature, the vendor with no business license, he didn't blink, just nodded slowly like someone who'd long suspected the crack in the wall and finally saw the daylight pouring through. Yeah, he said, voice low, that tracks. We sat at Lydia Harlow's kitchen table later that afternoon. The sunlight came in through checkered curtains and glinted off the rim of her stainless steel sink. Her home smelled like cinnamon and copy toner thanks to the stack of printed flyers she was trimming with a paper slicer at the counter. Sophia had her laptop open, tweaking the layout of a community special meeting notice. Lydia flipped open a green binder beside her tab, sticking out in rainbow sequins: board correspondence, member complaints, landscaping, invoices. Meeting minutes. Empty. I didn't have to ask how long she'd been preparing for this moment. I've got enough neighbors wondering where their dues go, she said to fill a meeting room twice over. Gerald cleared his throat, pulled a manila envelope from under his arm, and laid it on the table like a lawyer placing a final exhibit. Affidavit, he said. Says the charter I gave you is the original 2007 version, unamended, never lawfully replaced. He tapped the flap. Notarized this morning. County Clerk's Office. I opened it. The document bore his full name signature and a notary seal that shimmered faintly in the kitchen light. I slid it into a fresh folder labeled Founding Documents. Across from me, Emery scrolled through HOA quarterly statements on his tablet fingers, twitching every time he spotted a misalignment. 14 written complaints filed in 2021, he said. None received written response. 6 were about fees, 3 about the park delay, 2 about board transparency, and 1 about Myrna refusing to recuse herself during a vote about her own landscaping contract, Lydia added, without lifting her eyes from her stack. This isn't just governance negligence, Sophia said, not looking up. It's insulation. She clicked and dragged a line of text on her screen. The flyer now read, Special Community Meeting Monday, May 23rd, 6:00 p.m., Mesa Hills Recreation Hall. There was a link below the text. Click to RSVP. Your voice counts. A digital counter ticked up as we watched 12, then 14, then 17. I'll walk the cluster mailboxes this weekend, Lydia offered. Post these under every unit. Gerald leaned back in his chair. 20 households. That's what the charter says. Minimum quorum for a community-triggered meeting. Already at 19, Sophia said. The de Guzmans just shared it on the Nextdoor app. I opened the folder with the affidavit charter and the list of financial inconsistencies. At the back, I placed the official petition to call special HOA vote under Section 6.3, which I had just printed that morning. I picked up the pen, wrote my name in long, deliberate letters. Lowell A., Kinlan, Unit 13, Mesa Hills, HOA, Emery signed next. Then Lydia. Then Gerald, who paused before adding, We built this thing so no one could take it over quietly. Sophia turned the laptop toward me. We'll have 30 RSVPs by tomorrow. Probably more. I stared at the screen, at the rising number. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't marching. But I was moving, and I wasn't alone anymore. Back home, Darla was folding laundry when I walked in. She glanced at the manila envelope in my hand. That the affidavit. Yeah. And you filed the petition? Just did. She looked at me for a long second. If she feels cornered, she said quietly, she'll hit hard. Be ready. I nodded, because she was right. The next move wasn't about paper anymore. It was about people. Myrna came dressed for victory. Red blazer, clipboard, a 3-ring binder packed with color-coded tabs and more bravado than substance. Her hair was sprayed into a helmet of confidence. From the front of the community center, she smiled like a hostess at a banquet she planned, catered, and already deemed successful. I came with a manila folder and 43 signatures. The room buzzed like an electrical substation. Residents filled every folding chair in the Mesa Hills Recreation Hall, some in T-shirts and sandals, others in Sunday best. A few held coffee, several held phones already recording. Darla sat in the third row, lips tight, hands folded in her lap. Gerald, Lydia, and Sophia were along the right wall. Emery perched on a stool near the projector cart laptop bag at his feet. Near the podium sat a sealed envelope labeled in black marker, Financial Review Request. Emery, Culver, CPA. Myrna stepped to the microphone, tapped it twice, and welcomed everyone with her usual mix of sugar and starch. We're here today to discuss summer maintenance and upcoming security enhancements. First, a word of gratitude. Your support makes this neighborhood what it is. She didn't mention the petition, didn't mention the signatures, certainly didn't mention the charter. She tried to bulldoze the fire with a smiling face. I stood up. A few heads turned. Someone near the back muttered, "That's the accountant guy." I walked toward the mic, not quickly, but with the kind of pace that says I wasn't about to be ignored. Myrna moved half an inch to the side, forced to yield the podium. I opened the folder and pulled out a single page. I'd like to read Section 6.3 of our HOA charter, I said. My voice was calm, steady. My hands didn't shake. This document, the original from 2007, states, any change in financial obligation to members requires a 2/3 majority community vote conducted in open session and recorded in public minutes. A murmur swept through the room. Myrna tried to interject, but Gerald stepped forward and handed me a second sheet. I held it aloft. This, I continued, is a notarized affidavit from Mr. Gerald Pine, founding board member, attesting that the current operating charter in Myrna Quayle's possession was never lawfully adopted. The board has not held any vote to ratify changes. She stepped closer to the mic. Lowell, you're misreading the intent. Emery rose and approached the projector cart. He connected his laptop and the screen behind us flickered to life. Intent's one thing, he said. Here are the numbers. Slide 1 line item disbursements from 2021. Slide 2 payment to Southwest Security Advisors, LLC. Slide 3, no registered business found. Slide 4, board vote record, empty. He paused. $18,500 moved without oversight. The account logs show Myrna Quayle as sole authorizer. Gasps. Not from everyone, but from enough. Then, Sophia stepped forward, phone already queued. The video played. Myrna's voice clear as glass, promising the park would break ground by spring. The funds are earmarked. We're moving forward. A beat of silence followed. Then came the line I'd waited weeks to say. Under Section 8.1 of the Charter, I said, voice firm but not raised. If fund allocation occurs without community authorization, financial access is to be suspended pending board review and community vote. Myrna's eyes darted to Gerald. He was already speaking. I've spoken to the bank. He took a step forward calmly like someone walking into the ocean. As of this morning, per my legal standing and documentation, the HOA account has been frozen. No withdrawals, no dispersals, no new contracts. Until further notice. A chair scraped against the floor. Someone whispered, "Wait, really?" Myrna's lips parted, but no words came. Her hands hovered over the binder like it could offer a spell to reverse this. The room shifted energy-changing sides like wind. Darla met my eyes. She didn't smile, but she nodded. And I knew the meeting wasn't over, but the tide had turned. The park opened in late August. No big ribbon cutting, no dignitaries or speeches. Just a wide strip of red fabric tied between 2 shade posts, a pair of scissors borrowed from the library desk, and 2 boys who didn't wait for the adults to finish talking before sprinting toward the slide. The air was crisp for Placidus's dry, but gentle, with the late summer light casting long amber lines through the mesquite. Desert-adapted plants dotted the edges of the walkway. Someone had strung up a hummingbird feeder near the picnic tables, and already a few green-throated flashes were darting back and forth, competing for the perch. Darla and I sat on one of the new benches, hands brushing legs almost touching, but not quite. She sipped from a thermos that smelled of hibiscus and mint. I'd brought the manila folder out of habit, though I had no intention of opening it. It sat beside me like a quiet dog. Across the lawn, Sophia was showing a young couple how to sign up for the new HOA email list. Emery stood beside the bulletin board adjusting the laminated transparency roundup. September printout. A bar chart, 3 bullet points, 1 joke in parenthesis. Simple, honest, understandable. Gerald wasn't there. He had stepped down a week after the vote, saying he'd rather raise tomatoes than motions. But Lydia swore he still watched the recordings of every meeting and called her afterward with corrections. Lurks like a sage, she said. Myrna didn't contest the board's findings. No lawsuits were filed. After 2 mediated sessions, she quietly agreed to step aside and repay a portion of the misused funds. It wasn't dramatic, just a change of hands, a sigh of relief, and a line drawn under an old paragraph. I'd taken charge of digitizing the charter, scanned every page, noted every margin scribble, uploaded it with plain language summaries. We posted it on the HOA site under a tab called How It Actually Works. No passwords, no fine print. See them, Darla said quietly, nodding toward 2 kids racing down the gravel loop. One barefoot, the other with light-up sneakers. They never even knew there wasn't supposed to be a park, I said. She nudged me. They shouldn't have to. A few moments passed, filled with laughter and the rustle of dry branches overhead. I was scared, she said finally, not of Myrna, of what chasing all this might do to us. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. You were right to fight it, she added. I just didn't want to lose us in the process. You didn't, I said. You anchored me, when I was ready to file motions with my hair on fire. She laughed, then leaned her head on my shoulder. Lydia walked by with a box of leftover flyers and paused in front of us. She reached into her canvas tote and handed me a small envelope. Don't open it here, she said. You'll blush. When she was gone, I opened it anyway. Inside was a folded note on thick paper. The handwriting was precise, all caps, for seeing what others missed, for proving we could steer our own ship, for doing it without shouting. It wasn't signed. Didn't need to be. I looked down at the manila folder. The charter sat inside corners now soft from handling edges taped where they'd started to fray. There was a new copy in the board's archives, of course, digitized and backed up, but I kept this one, the original, the paper that started it all. As the sun slipped lower over the Sandia Mountains, I folded the folder closed one last time, It was never about the money, I said aloud, mostly to myself. Darla looked over. I slid the folder back into my bag. It was about who gets to decide. The hummingbird feeder swayed gently in the late summer breeze, and somewhere behind me a child's laughter scattered across the gravel like marbles let loose. The manila folder stayed zipped in my bag, creased-marked but intact now, and quiet. Maybe justice isn't always a gavel or a spotlight. Sometimes it's a printed page, a neighbor's nod, and a park that finally gets built. I've learned that fixing what's broken doesn't always mean yelling louder. It can mean standing still long enough for others to see. Has a small decision ever turned into something bigger than you expected? Share it below, or just say hi. We read everything.